Today we're going to be looking at multiple UV maps in Blender. If you've been around the Second Life support groups and that, you'll sometimes see a question come up about UV maps, and generally the advice is only one UV map, which is correct for Second Life because Second Life will only accept one UV map, which will be the active map on export, but we'll go into that in a minute. But we can use two, three, multiple UV maps in Blender, and this can be a good tool. What I've got here is I've got this L-shaped wall, and I've just set up a simple sun lamp, just to throw some light and shadows around, so we can see a little clearer what's going on. Right, now with this wall I've added a simple material. Let me expand this. So it's just a diffuse with an image texture and the normal mapping nodes, and I'm using this brick texture. Okay, now I've already unwrapped this wall, so if I go into edit mode you can see I've got this unwrap within the bounds of my image texture. However, if I go into a texture view, you will see that the scale of the bricks is way too large. Yeah, it doesn't look unrealistic at all. This actual wall dimensions of it are something 4 meters by 6 meters by 2 meters high. So we obviously need a lot more bricks in there than what we got. The simplest way to do this is in your UV editor, make sure everything's selected and just scale until you get the amount of bricks that you like, or what looks right. But the problem we have now is our UVs extend way off the texture, way too large, and we've got overlapping UVs and everything from our first unwrap. Okay, so although we've got the scale of the bricks right, this will be impossible to bake. The reason the bricks are shown while it's off the texture, probably easier to show that here, is because Blender actually has a tile texture format. Whenever you load a texture into Blender, it will tile, but we just don't show that normally. Okay, right, so what we need is another UV layout which is within the texture bounds, within this, I think this is a 1024, I'm not sure, but anyway, within the bounds of the texture. So if we come across to the object data tab, we'll see that we've got our first UV map here, the unwrap that I did, already in the UV stack. Okay, let me extend this down a bit. Right, what we can do is we can add more UV maps, and we can really add as many as we like, but for this instance we only need one, and need two I should say, and for most projects that's all you need is two, if you need two at all, but you know, if you use multiple UVs, probably get away with two. So I'm going to add another UV unwrap here. Okay, and you see it's got a name, UV map 001, meaning it's basically a copy of this one. I'm going to rename this just by double clicking it, and I'm going to call it baked, because this is the UV map I want to bake my texture onto. Okay, this one UV map, the name is fine, but I'm just going to call it source. It might be easier for you to understand what's going on, and it would help if I could spell source. There we go. Alright, so we've got these two UV maps, and if I swap between them you will see, if you're watching down here, that they are identical to each other. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the bake texture so it's highlighted, okay, and I'm going to leave, this is very important, leave the camera on the source. The camera icon means that is the projection that Blender will put in to the into the texture to bake it onto the new UV. You can change this just by clicking here, but we want to leave this on the source. Right, okay, let me just make a little more room here. Alright, so with this and everything selected, I can now do another unwrap. So I'm going to press U, and this time I'm going to do a Smart UV project. Smart UV is just going to arrange them, all the islands, and scale them so they fit within the texture space here. So if I do you and a smart UV project, and I'll just accept the defaults, okay, you see this whole wall is now within this texture space. It's changed the texture up here. Don't worry about that because it's reading from this texture. In fact, if we go back to the source, it should change back to our original, meaning this is the one that it's going to input into the texture baking process. And that's why we have the camera highlighted here. So with the camera icon on the source and the bake selected, I'm going to make a new texture here. Okay, and I'm going to call this the bake texture. Call it baked brick, actually. Okay, so I'll call this baked brick. I'll leave it at 1024 for now. I'm going to turn off alpha because I don't need it, and press OK. So I now have this new blank texture. I can put this texture into our node stack now. So I'm going to Shift A, add a texture, an environment texture. Leave it down here so Blender knows what to make it onto because it's highlighted, and select that texture, bake brick. Okay, and then I can go ahead and bake this. Now I'm just going to bake this at normal samples, at default samples and everything else, just for the ease of, or just for time constraints within the tutorial. So we'll bake this, and I'm going to bake the combined texture and bake. Okay, it's going to take a few minutes to bake, so I'm just going to pause the video while it's baking. Okay, it's just about finished here. And it has. So let me expand this out. Okay, you can see the texture is baked as desired, all on the one texture space. If I was to put this into object mode now, and you can see where it has baked our shadows and our lighting onto the texture. So that's good. We could save this texture out. I mean, I would probably do something a bit better with lighting. Actually, let's do something a bit better with lighting. The back side of it's looking very, very dark. Alright, so here's another little trick that I use sometimes. When I'm using... Actually, let's do it another way. Let's set it up with a HDRI and go through what I would normally do to overcome these lighting problems. So I'm going to delete this lamp here. Okay, now I'm going to set up a HDRI. Now I've got the Pro Lighting Skies add-on from Blender Guru. This is a paid add-on. It's not cheap either. But you know, the HDRI we did in previous lessons will work fine. It's just I use this in my commercial projects, and it comes with a load of HDRI skies. I'm just going to choose one, which I think maybe this one. We'll try it. Let me go into a rendered view here. So Z9. Alright. Probably want a bit more sky strength, just to brighten up the overall texture. That's looking better. Rotation. Let's have a look around here. So the bright part is coming towards the front. That's kind of fine. Right, okay. Dark side's still a little dark. So often what I'll do here, let me go back into a solid view. Let's display the world background. Is that going to show our HDRI? Yes, it is. Okay. So often what I'll do here is if I want to throw more light on the back, rather than adding lamps and that, I will add a kind of a backdrop. So if I go Shift A and let's say I add a mesh plane, I'm just going to bring it down off the wall a bit. I'm going to scale it up. Okay. And probably a bit more than that. Okay. Let me edit it. And let me just deselect this front vertex. Yeah, I should be on vertex mode. Alright, select these three and extrude them up. Okay, so I've got this kind of corner object here. I'm going to add a material to it. And I'm going to make the colour of this material pure white. Okay, what this will do, this will act as a reflector. So it will take some of this ambient light, this environment light around, and it's going to bounce off and reflect onto the darker sides of the wall. So let me just turn around here a little bit. And if I go back into a rendered view. Right, so you can see the back is kind of lit up now. If I was to undo that plane, might be hard to see, but it is a bit darker. So, I'll say undo, I meant hide. But it does throw some more light on this. Okay, so I'm looking at this wall. That's looking fine. Actually, I'm going to make another texture here so we can compare this. So, let's add a new texture. And call it Baked Brick 2. Okay, let's select our wall again. Actually, I think we'll probably need to unwrap this wall before we do anything, so it just needs to be a simple unwrap. So I'll edit it, select all, unwrap. That's fine. We're not actually baking a texture for this backdrop, so it doesn't matter. Select the wall. We'll select our baked Brick 2 here, so we can compare the two, and we'll bake this out real quick. So I'll hit bake, and while it's baking I'm going to pause the video and we'll see you in a minute. Okay, so that's finished baking. Let's go full screen with the image editor, and let's compare the two. So that's Baked Brick 2 compared to Baked Brick. You can see how that backdrop has thrown light onto all these dark faces here. There we go. So it's looking a lot better than it's looking more like I was expecting it to. I could have added lamps. Let's go back into. I could have added some lamps back here or something like that. But then what that's going to do is it's going to throw shadows across the wall where I didn't want. If I added a lamp up here, it's going to throw another shadow across here, which is unnatural to the environment texture. So just by adding this backdrop and using it as a reflector for something for the light to bounce back off, is looking a lot more natural. Okay, so for the moment, let me hide this backdrop. Let me hide the world background. Okay, and let's go into a textured view. Okay, so now we're looking at this wall, and this is the texture as you see it here. Okay, it's throwing the shadows across where I wanted. It's lightened on the back of the wall. So that's not looking black as the other texture was. So Baked 2, Baked Brick. Okay, you see how dark that texture is. Just by adding the reflector, the backdrop, it's really lightened my texture up the way I wanted. Okay, Baked Brick 2. Okay, and it's also allowed me to get all my texture onto one texture space, rather than the original UV. That's going to show yeah, that's going to. If I was to edit that, you're going to see this is all over the top, all outside of the texture area. Okay. Right, so that's using two UV maps to create what you wanted. So you've got your source texture, and then you've got your baked texture. There we go. I've got a baked texture, which is all fitting onto one UV map. Now, for the purposes of uploading, when you go to export this, you want to make sure that the baked is selected. It's highlighted, not the camera icon, but the actual, on my theme anyway, the blue highlight on it. And then you can export as normal. What will happen is when you go to export, so File, Export, Collada Default, okay, it will export with that active UV map. Okay, now when you export to Collada or DAE, it will only export one UV map, and that is the active one. Okay, so you could go ahead and export it as normal. If you find this at all confusing until you get used to it, the one thing you could do is just come back up to your source, select that, and delete it. Okay, but that is kind of usually, you could Control Z back now, but once you go on to the next step, it kind of lose it a bit. But if you're at all confused which one that you should have selected, just delete the source, and then you can export without worrying about it.